Thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Work from Home, Connect at Work. I'm Riz, the co-founder of Hampr.
And I'm Albert, the head of growth at Hampr.
As you can tell by the name, today we're speaking about the future of work. Our goal for today is to present some ideas based on all the research and findings that have come out since the pandemic around what the future of work might look like, and the key things you can look out for to implement to drive a 10 out of 10 work culture where everyone feels valued by the organization and connected to the organization. So on that note, let's get into it. I think the best place to start is to understand how COVID impacted the workplace. There's probably no doubt that the pandemic led to one of the most significant and abrupt changes to the way we work in modern history. Yes, it's true that flexible working arrangements have been offered by many workplaces in the past, but the actual uptake of those arrangements was always very low. So, for the vast majority of organizations, COVID meant that they had to adapt overnight. But what we've learned since then is that organizations and workers have been very quick to adapt and settle into working from home with nothing more than the internet, a computer, and a mobile phone. I think the movement towards building a more flexible and hybrid workplace model has been gaining traction for some time. But COVID pushed the accelerator on this and has moved us forward at least a decade in less than a few months. The question that remains now as the dust settles is, where do we go from here?
Absolutely. There's actually a lot to take into account here, especially if we consider the extent to which COVID forced companies to rethink traditional workplace models. With so many companies having to scramble to send their employees home to work, this experiment really has tested the fiber of relationships between organizations and their teams. It's likely to have a lasting impact on how we work, and when we sprinkle into the mix the massive changes due to things like AI-led automation and easier access to global talent, this has permanently changed the way that we think about work, the workforce, and the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. This introduces some really interesting challenges for organizations relating to how they operate in a post-pandemic world. And I think we'll find that those options that might seem to enhance productivity or economic benefits in the short run may have much more detrimental outcomes in the longer term, particularly when we think of workplace or organizational culture. We all know that organizations that have a strong culture or sense of combined purpose are much more likely to grow and thrive in a sustainable way. But there are some important questions around how you maintain workplace culture in a post-pandemic world. So, all this being said, it's probably worth touching on how different organizations manage the impact of COVID on the workplace and what their outlook is going forward.
Absolutely. So, although the remote work model has gained significant traction throughout the pandemic, it's clear that big organizations don't actually unanimously embrace it. Let's take a few examples here. Spotify announced their transition to a permanent flexible work model with its work from anywhere policy. The new strategy lets the 6,500 global employees choose how they want to work for the company, whether it's in the office, remotely, or even at a co working space that the company will pay a subscription for. Atlassian, an Australian homegrown unicorn, employees will actually only be required to come into the office 4 times a year under a plan called Team Anywhere. The co-founder, Scott Farquhar, said he's only been in the office 3 times in the past year, and the new policy is all about attracting the best talent. With Goldman Sachs, the CEO of the investment bank, David Solomon, actually rejected the work from home policy, stating that it's not ideal for us and it's not the new normal. He also points out, quote unquote, I do think for a business like ours, which is innovative, collaborative, apprenticeship culture, this is not ideal. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, the CEO, said, quote unquote, how do you build culture and character? How are you going to learn properly? According to Dimon, a lot of work takes place not at the meeting, but before and after the meeting when people share ideas. Netflix co-chief executive Reed Hastings told Wall Street Journal in 2020 that he didn't see any positives in a remote working environment. He said, quote unquote, not being able to get together in person, particularly internationally, is a pure negative. Citigroup Jane Fraser says, quote unquote, I certainly imagine everyone back in the office. I do think from a cultural point of view, apprenticeship, the sense of belonging, you are better together. And last but not least, HP Enrique J. Lores says, quote unquote, we think that the way of working is going to be hybrid. People will work from the office and they will work from home. So Riz, I think it is actually safe to say that we will end up with a hybrid workforce regardless post-pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also really important to understand what employees are saying about their preferences relating to the future of work. To explore the statistics, we had a look at a Capterra survey of Australian employees from junior staff all the way through to leadership teams and business owners. I think at the time of the survey, about 2/3 of Australians were working from home.
At the beginning, employers were understandably nervous about transitioning to a remote working environment. The biggest concerns included retaining staff and ensuring that they remain productive while working from home. Fortunately, 38% of the employees surveyed said that they're just as productive at home, while 44% said that they're more productive at home. So that's a combined consensus of 78%.
Managing employees and ensuring that they're productive in a remote setting can be difficult to track without interfering too often. The survey found that 56% of employees preferred the way that they were managed in the office to home, and 31% of remote staff felt that they were overmanaged.
Since COVID, 15% more business leaders within small and mid sized organizations began implementing employee monitoring software. 78% of remote leaders think employee monitoring tools are positive, compared to a 51% of non remote leaders, which I guess that makes total sense.
So now let's get into the nuts and bolts of what the future of work will be. What's clear is that employers and employees now know far more about remote working than they ever did at the start of the pandemic.
And although we can all recognize that there are positives, including more flexibility for workers and potentially lower overhead for employers, there are real concerns about the impact remote work could have on trust, company culture, how people's careers progress in general, and how employees collaborate.
I think that the balance we had pre-COVID wasn't right. The social norm of everyone having to be in the office full-time 5 days a week didn't allow for the best outcomes. It's clear that the majority of people want some flexibility, and that flexibility can lead to increased individual productivity and higher overall employee satisfaction. But on the other hand, there are immense benefits across the organization from being in the same physical space as your colleagues. Maybe not 5 days a week, but at some regular interval, particularly in relation to company-wide things like culture, staff retention, and overall productivity.
And it's for all these reasons, Riz, I think it's actually safe to say that the future of work is a hybrid because it's clear that it's what people want, and workplaces have actually seen firsthand that a hybrid model can actually work. The big problem is, though, that you need to come across a definition, somewhat loose of what a hybrid working model is. So based off the research and the real life examples that we've seen in the past year, there is a growing consensus around the hybrid working model being one where people have flexibility and autonomy, meaning they can work from home, they can work from the office, and have more flexibility in their schedule. So, moving away from the traditional 9 to 5 every day. But more importantly, we'll see some organizational endorsement around physical interaction for employees across teams and the organization more broadly, at least on some regular interval.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's incorrect to look at the equation with productivity and organizational outcomes on the one side and employee satisfaction needs and wants on the other, because ultimately they're directly connected to one another. Any organization is nothing more than the sum of its people, period. Therefore, motivated and satisfied employees will directly result in productive and positive outcomes for an organization. So what we really want to try and achieve is an organizational culture that prioritizes connection and value. What I mean by that is we want employees to feel, one, connected to each other, which means that they'll be connected to the organization. Two, connected to the purpose of the organization. And three, you want them to feel like they're valued by the organization.
That's actually really well put, Riz. And ultimately, when we look at the practical implications, particularly through the lens of a hybrid working model, the real challenges that companies face are how do you actually make employees feel connected to the organization and feel valued by the organization? And this is where I think people and culture teams, office administrative teams, and facility teams play such a crucial role in building that hybrid working model. And by the way, it's important to call out that these roles are now being totally redefined and are significantly more challenging than ever before. These are the teams that can really drive and implement initiatives and processes that support building positive organizational culture.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, connection to an organization traditionally has a lot to do with the social capital that you build over time. It's that social capital which helps you navigate the organization. It leads to new ideas and advice for how to get things done within the organization. And ultimately, it improves decision making and productivity across the organization.
Yeah, and it's difficult to build social capital in a hybrid working model. The intricate social networks within organizations are slowly weakening the longer people don't connect with one another. This is particularly acute for people that are new to a company or new to a role.
So this is kind of where we can lean into the concept of work from home, connect at work, which actually means something more like work from wherever you like, whenever you like, but connect at work. And this is a really fascinating concept when you think about it, because what it's really saying is that Over the past couple of decades, we've realized on the one hand that instead of constricting you to a cubicle to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, it's better to give you flexibility and trust to do your work in the best way that you can, because this will lead to better outcomes for you and the organization. But on the other hand, there's a significant positive dividend that everyone receives when they're connected to each other. So, although a hybrid working model means more flexibility overall, for this model to really be successful, it's likely that it needs to include an endorsement for people to come into the workplace on some regular interval to connect with one another. And on those days that people are coming in, it's not just about working, but more of an emphasis on connecting with each other. There's a McKinsey study that predicts that offices will have specific purposes going forward. And these are for things like socializing, collaborating, and embedding culture.
So the question I have here is, what can organizations do to encourage employees to connect with each other at the workplace? And I'm particularly talking about those things that can be influenced by people in culture teams, office administrators, and facility teams. Ultimately, the goal here is to make people want to come into the office. It's actually got to be worth their while. An analogy that I have is, you might choose to go out to have dinner, even though you could eat at home. You only make the choice to go out if it's worth your while, right? So to bring it back, why would someone specially make the commute into the office when they can be just as productive, if not more, at home, minus the commute altogether? I actually want to touch on 4 ideas that are being tested across the globe and here in Australia to encourage that connectivity. Some progressive people and culture teams have been looking at ways to create excitement around coming back to the office, whether it's celebrating milestones, calendar events, promotions, and even activations. This is a great way to give employees an incentive to come back into the office and celebrate or participate in something together. We've also seen many offices introduce food as an incentive for people to come back in, whether it's a weekly team lunch or catered meetings. Food, as you and I know, Riz, plays a vital role in breaking down social barriers and building connections. It is, after all, much easier to engage in a social discussion over a meal than it is over a meeting or in a Zoom call. We've also seen many organizations establish core hours, which are key times where people are in the office together, whether it's across the entire organization or just your department. An example of this would be coming into work every Tuesday between 10 and 2 p.m. My favorite one, many organizations are actually redesigning their offices. You probably don't need dedicated workstations for every employee anymore. Instead, they now need more spaces set up for innovation and collaboration. This means more hot desking, smaller conference rooms, and more breakout and open spaces.
I know we're getting towards the end of our webinar, but it just wouldn't be right if I didn't tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Hampr to help workplaces navigate towards a hybrid working model. I think for the most of you that have heard about Hampr or used Hampr, you'd know that our core driver is to use food and events to build great culture in the workplace. Everything we do, everything we've built, and everything we will build is grounded upon that thesis. So particularly relevant to the topic of helping people connect at the workplace, there's a few really cool ways in which we can help. First is our order ahead tool, which allows teams, employees, and guests to select their meals ahead of time. Each individual can customize their order to meet their specific dietary requirements and preferences. Meals arrive with each person's name labeled on the packaging. This is particularly useful in a hybrid working model for 2 key reasons. Number 1, it gives employees something to look forward to when coming into the office, with the added perk that they get to select what they'd like to eat. And number 2, it's actually very difficult for someone organizing food to gauge the number of people that will be coming in for a meeting or a team lunch, which means that you're much more likely to over-cater or under-cater, and you're also much more likely to miss key dietary requirements. So the order ahead tool helps you order the correct amount of food.
Thanks, Riz. The second thing is our event planning tool, which helps you plan any workplace event by sending you tailored quotes and recommendations to compare from a variety of different suppliers. Basically, it removes all the guesswork and lets a supplier guide you to put on the best event that meets your budget and your preferences for that day. The final thing I want to mention is Hampr's digital workspace. It allows food and event organizers to collaborate and manage tasks anywhere, anytime. In a hybrid workplace where it's not certain who will be in the office on any particular day anymore, it's vital that these teams can manage orders, supplies, and deliveries on the go or from wherever they are working that day. I think this moves us towards the end of our webinar, but before we head off, I just want to summarize the key takeaways from what we discussed today. Firstly, COVID forced companies to rethink traditional workplace models. It has permanently changed the way we think about work, the workforce, and the workplace. Although not organizations agree on the future of work, it's very likely that we will end up with a hybrid working model where people will have flexibility and autonomy where they can work from home, the office, or have more flexibility in their schedule in general, moving away from that, traditional expectation of working 9 to 5 every day. We'll see some organizational endorsement around physical interaction for employees across teams and the organization more broadly. The success of a hybrid working model is pinned upon employees feeling connected to each other and the organization, connected to the purpose of the organization, and you want them to feel like they're valued by the organization.
The concept of work from home, connect at work actually means something more like work from wherever you like, whenever you like, but connect at work. And it's better to give you flexibility and trust to do the work in the best way that you can. But at the same time, there's a significant positive dividend that everyone receives when they're connected to each other. We also went through some key actions to build culture in the workplace, where we talked about creating excitement in the office, using food and events as an incentive to bring staff back to the office, establishing core working hours, and redesigning your space to be a more collaborative office environment. Finally, we went through 3 ways in which Hampr is helping build a hybrid working model. The first was ordering individual meals through our order ahead tool. The second was using our event planning tool to organize workspace events. And the third was the way we support remote working through our cloud workspace.
Thanks, Riz. I think you covered that really, really well. If you guys have any questions or want to continue the conversations any further, then feel free to reach out. We're happy to have a chat. Riz, myself, and the entire Hampr team is actually very passionate about building really positive and powerful organizational cultures. So we're always happy to hear and share ideas with you. Also, we'd like to know if you like this webinar, and perhaps if you'd like to see more from us, feel free to reach out to us through the contact details that are up on the screen now.
One more thing that I'd like to mention is that we'd like to show you our appreciation for reaching the end of the webinar. And for doing so, we'd like to offer a free tasting lunch for teams that work in people and culture or office administration or facilities management. So if you're interested, flick us an email and we'll organize a date or a time and bring that in for you. Other than that, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.